You always thought I was nothing, Claire Thompson whispered under her breath as she adjusted the strap of her emerald green silk dress. Stepping into the crisp morning air of Manhattan, the faint scent of roasted coffee beans mingling with the subtle tang of fallen leaves, her heels clicking with quiet authority against the polished sidewalk, the towering glass of the corporate district reflecting the early sunlight, each pane a mirror of the life she had rebuilt from scratch. And there he was, Ryan Mitchell, leaning casually against the sleek black Range Rover parked curbside, his tailored navy suit pristine, hair perfectly combed, a smug smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as if nothing had changed, as if she was still the timid, ordinary woman he had once mocked, his eyes narrowing slightly as they fell upon her, confusion flickering across the well-practiced arrogance. And Claire didn't falter, didn't rush. She allowed the pause to stretch, to taste the moment of quiet. Power as her fingers brushed over the smooth leather of her handbag, the subtle sparkle of her watch catching the light just so. A small, unspoken announcement of her control, a whisper of the empire she had started to assemble from tiny beginnings, from late nights with spreadsheets and phone calls to potential investors, a world Ryan had never bothered to understand, her breath steady, measured, chest rising with calm determination as she walked past him, each step deliberate, the click of her heels a metronome counting out a new rhythm, a rhythm of resurgence, of earned dignity. And though Ryan's lips parted as if to speak, his words faltered, leaving only the rustle of the autumn leaves swirling around them, the distant hum of traffic, the muted chatter of early morning pedestrians, all a soundtrack to the silent confrontation. And Claire's mind briefly drifted to the past, to the days of whispered criticisms, of dinners where his laughter had cut deeper than any insult, the sting of being undervalued. The countless nights she had cried herself to sleep wondering if the world would ever see her worth. But now she carried herself with a poise that demanded recognition, a presence that said she was more than the sum of his dismissals. And as she reached the revolving glass doors of the building, where the acquisition list would soon reveal the truth of her ascent, a subtle smile played across her lips, eyes glinting with both anticipation and restraint. A silent promise that the next few moments would leave him reevaluating every assumption he had ever made about her. And the city seemed to pause for a heartbeat, the sunlight catching the edges of the skyscrapers like a spotlight on her stage, a stage she had built with her own hands. And though the doors swirled open before her, she did not rush, allowing the world to watch, to wait, to recognize. And in that pregnant silence, every nerve thrummed with the story of a woman who refused to be ordinary, who had been underestimated, who was about to quietly, irrevocably, claim her place in a game he thought he had mastered. Inside the revolving glass doors, Claire felt the faint hum of the building vibrate through the soles of her shoes, a pulse that mirrored the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat as she moved with deliberate grace through the marble lobby. The scent of polished stone and freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint aroma of expensive leather from the concierge desk, every detail of the space reflecting wealth and precision. A world she had once observed from the outside and now navigated as a participant, her mind briefly recalling the long months of strategy sessions, networking dinners, and early mornings reviewing spreadsheets. The hours of phone calls with investors and advisors that had slowly shaped her into someone who commanded respect without a word, someone who turned presence into power. And as she passed the security desk, the guard lifted his head, his expression flickering with recognition tinged with surprise, an acknowledgement of her transformation she allowed to pass unnoticed, keeping her focus on the escalator that would carry her to the floor where the acquisition list had just been posted. The glass panels reflecting a city awake with movement and ambition, the soft chatter of employees, and the distant echo of footsteps creating a rhythm that seemed orchestrated for her entrance. And she could not help but reflect on how different this moment was from the countless mornings she had spent balancing ledgers in a cramped studio apartment, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating determined eyes, the faint scratch of pen on paper as she mapped projections and strategies, the quiet solitude that had been both a challenge and a sanctuary, teaching patience and precision in equal measure. And now that discipline manifested in the subtle tilt of her chin, the measured pace of her steps, the calm authority in her posture. every fiber of her being aligned with the image she projected to the world. And as she reached the sleek elevator doors, her fingers brushed the polished steel, smooth and cool, grounding her in the present. A tether between the past struggles and the forthcoming revelation, each breath deliberate, lungs filling with the crisp air of achievement, mind recounting every obstacle overcome, every slight endured, every doubt converted into determination. And as the door slid open, she was met with a corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, sunlight streaming in at an angle that highlighted the subtle textures of the carpets and the muted gleam of the wood paneling, a silent stage set for the unveiling of what she had quietly built. The acquisition list lying ahead, each name a testament to calculated persistence, to strategic alliances carefully nurtured over months, and she allowed herself a moment to savor the anticipation, the thrill of approaching the precise point where effort and timing intersected, the knowledge that those who had underestimated her would see, in real time, the outcome of every decision made in quiet rooms and over hushed conversations, as the final steps carried her closer to the display. The hum of the building now a soundtrack to her own power, every sound amplified, every movement noticed, and she could feel Ryan, though still steps behind, sensing something unfamiliar, a shift, an imbalance he had not anticipated, and she kept walking, every motion a silent declaration, each inhale a measured preparation for the moment where perception would be shattered and respect claimed, her eyes fixed on the glass display case where the list had been posted moments ago, a digital glow reflecting in her determined eyes, a subtle, satisfied smile forming as she realized the scene was set, the world waiting for her to take her place within it. Claire Thompson paused in front of the sleek digital display, her fingers hovering over the screen as the glow illuminated her confident, composed face, the city skyline behind her glinting through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a quiet symphony of steel and glass, and she felt the collective gaze of the office staff ripple across the floor, whispers fading into stillness as the screen refreshed to reveal the acquisition list in full, her name prominently at the top, accompanied by numbers and positions that spoke volumes of her strategic rise. And Ryan Mitchell, still lingering near the doorway, felt a sudden chill, the familiar arrogance draining as he registered the undeniable truth. The shift in power, so precise it left him momentarily frozen. The echoes of his past mockery and dismissive laughter clashing with the reality before him, while Claire's expression remained calm, serene, a perfect mask of controlled triumph. Each detail of her attire, the soft shimmer of her watch, the polished elegance of her shoes, the subtle tilt of her chin, reinforcing the story of her hard-won authority, and she allowed herself a brief moment to inhale the ambient scent of polished wood and faint coffee, grounding herself in the present. A subtle smile tugging at the corners of her lips as she registered the unspoken astonishment surrounding her, the quiet nods of acknowledgement from colleagues who had watched her journey. Each step she had taken from uncertainty to calculated influence now crystallizing in this single, luminous moment. And as she turned to face Ryan fully, the distance between them felt charged, a silent tension that spoke louder than any words, his eyes tracing the arc of her shoulders, the controlled elegance of her movements, the effortless command of space she now inhabited. And though he opened his mouth, no sound came, his carefully constructed composure cracking under the weight of recognition, and Claire simply nodded once, lightly, a gesture both courteous and assertive, before moving toward the meeting room, the camera lingering on the reflective glass walls capturing her silhouette framed against the bright New York morning, a quiet declaration of her unassailable presence, her past struggles, her meticulous planning, and the subtle, unspoken message that her power was not loud, not brash, but deliberate, thoughtful, and irreversible, leaving the audience with a sense of anticipation for what decisions she would make next, how she would navigate this unexpected advantage, and the unshakable certainty that in this game, she had reclaimed her place, not through confrontation or noise, but through the unwavering precision of her own rise. Claire stepped into the expansive boardroom, the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows catching the subtle shimmer of her jewelry and casting delicate patterns across the polished marble floor, the air tinged with the faint aroma of fresh coffee and the muted hum of the building's ventilation system. Every detail of the space radiating authority and sophistication. And as she approached the central table where the executive team had gathered for the morning briefing, she felt the weight of every glance on her. Some curious, some measured, all aware that the dynamics in the room had shifted subtly. An invisible current of anticipation threading through the room, her heels clicking in a steady, unhurried rhythm, each step asserting her presence without a word, and the soft rustle of papers, the quiet murmur of introductions, and the low hum of computer equipment became the soundtrack to her silent command. Ryan, standing near the back, stiffened, his expression tightening as he registered not just her physical entrance, but the aura of confidence she radiated, the meticulous control in the tilt of her chin, the measured pace of her movements, the calm authority that contrasted sharply with his habitual bluster. And Claire took a seat at the head of the table, smoothing the front of her tailored blazer, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the subtle cedar of the conference room furniture, drawing attention to her presence without forcing it. And as the digital screens flickered to life, projecting charts, forecasts, and strategic opportunities, she leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning the data. Every calculation, every figure a testament to the quiet diligence she had invested in her company. The months of research, negotiations, and careful planning that had brought her to this moment. And as she addressed the team, her voice calm, precise, yet carrying an unspoken authority, each word chosen with care to command attention and respect. The room responded with focused energy, colleagues nodding, adjusting their positions, leaning in, fully aware that she had orchestrated this space with a level of competence that left no room for doubt. And Ryan's eyes flicked to her repeatedly, the familiar arrogance faltering as he recognized the strategic brilliance that had always been hidden beneath her understated presence, the realization settling uncomfortably that the woman he once dismissed as ordinary now directed the flow of the meeting, set the tone for discussion, and subtly dictated the outcomes. And Claire's lips curved into the faintest, self-contained smile as she guided the conversation, acknowledging proposals, weighing options, and steering decisions with deft precision, each gesture a reminder that influence could be wielded without raising a voice, that mastery was shown through calm, calculated action. And as the session drew toward its pivotal moment, she paused, letting the weight of her decisions hang in the room, the team collectively holding their breath, sensing the moment where plans would solidify and her authority would be cemented, while Ryan, standing at the periphery, could only watch, unable to interject, every instinct to challenge tempered by the undeniable clarity of her command. And as she leaned back, allowing the room to absorb the finality of her direction, the sunlight glinting across the surfaces, Claire's gaze met his for a fleeting second, steady, unyielding, a silent acknowledgement of victory earned through intellect, patience, and resilience, leaving the air charged with anticipation, the subtle promise that her next move would be decisive, calculated, and irreversible. Claire walked toward the expansive windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, her reflection merging with the cityscape, a visual echo of her journey from obscurity to quiet authority, the subtle hum of the ventilation system and the distant murmur of office activity blending into a backdrop that highlighted her presence. And as she paused, resting a hand lightly on the smooth marble railing, she reflected on the months of meticulous planning that had brought her to this vantage point, from countless strategic meetings to late-night calls with investors, every decision measured and deliberate, each calculated step reinforcing her emerging influence, the soft shine of her emerald green silk dress catching the morning light and accentuating the precise poise she carried effortlessly, while Ryan remained just behind her, his posture stiffening as he observed the woman he had once dismissed, noting the calm authority she radiated, the ease with which she navigated a space he had assumed she would never command. And as the elevator chimed softly on the next floor, Claire descended with the same deliberate grace, each click of her heels on the polished stone floor a measured cadence of regained control, her presence commanding attention without a single word, the room subtly shifting as she entered, the team instinctively orienting toward her, recognizing the quiet power she wielded through competence and composure. her eyes scanning the faces, acknowledging nods and subtle gestures of deference without disrupting the flow of discussion, the sunlight reflecting off the glass surfaces casting subtle highlights that mirrored her calm, assured expression, and she began to address the next phase of negotiations, her voice even and precise, each word conveying clarity and purpose, weaving through the data, charts, and projections as if painting a picture of inevitable success. The tension in the air not from fear, but from the recognition of her strategic mastery. Ryan's expression shifting from disbelief to reluctant admiration, every instinct telling him that the landscape had changed irreversibly. And as Claire moved through the room, the hum of energy, the quiet rustle of papers, and the measured footfalls of colleagues underscored the seamless integration of her influence into the environment, a testament to her calculated ascent. While outside, the city carried on, indifferent yet illuminated by the same sunlight that seemed to spotlight her silhouette, each reflective surface capturing a woman transformed, every detail of her attire, posture, and gaze a statement of accomplishment. And as she approached the central table where key documents awaited her review, the anticipation in the room condensed into a silent acknowledgement of her authority, the subtle interplay of light, space, and presence affirming that the ordinary assumptions once held about her were no longer valid. And with a final, controlled breath, Claire leaned forward, fingertips lightly brushing the table, her gaze lifting to meet Ryan's for a fleeting moment, steady, unyielding, the unspoken declaration of her mastery, leaving him unable to respond. The room, exhaling in quiet recognition of her calculated, undeniable triumph. And in that lingering stillness, the sense of anticipation for what she would accomplish next settled over the scene. The story of resilience, intelligence, and understated power etched into every detail of her presence. Claire walked out of the boardroom into the bright corridor, the sunlight streaming through the expansive windows reflecting off the polished stone floors, each step measured and deliberate, her emerald green silk dress flowing softly behind her, the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee from the cafe below, a reminder of the long hours she had invested in building her influence from scratch. The hum of the building's ventilation and distant office chatter providing a muted backdrop to her composed stride. And as she approached the elevator, the polished stainless steel doors reflecting her poised silhouette, Ryan Mitchell lingered at the far end of the hall, eyes following her every movement. A mix of disbelief and reluctant acknowledgement crossing his features, for he now understood that the quiet, ordinary woman he had once dismissed had transformed into someone commanding attention and respect without raising her voice. Claire's thoughts flickered briefly to the months of meticulous planning, the strategic calls, and negotiations that had shaped this moment, each decision calculated, each risk carefully measured, the solitary nights spent reviewing data and building alliances culminating in this precise point in time, and she felt a surge of quiet satisfaction as the elevator doors opened. The soft mechanical were blending with the distant city sounds, and stepping inside, she pressed the button to the rooftop floor, each motion controlled, deliberate, a reflection of the authority she now held. While Ryan hesitated just outside, uncertain, every instinct telling him he had underestimated the woman standing before him. And as the elevator ascended, the city skyline expanded before her, sunlight glinting off the glass towers, a symbol of both opportunity and the power she now wielded, the soft hum of the cables and movement of the cabin accompanying her steady breath, her mind replaying the small victories and careful steps that had led to this day, each one a brick in the foundation of her regained confidence. And as the elevator chimed to signal the rooftop floor, Claire emerged into the open space, the wind carrying a faint cool edge against her skin. The panoramic view of Manhattan stretching in every direction, sunlight catching the edges of the buildings like spotlights, casting a glow on the terrace where she now stood, and she allowed herself a brief pause, letting the vastness of the city mirror the expanse of possibilities before her. Every glance at the horizon a reminder of the power she had cultivated, the influence she had claimed, the careful orchestration of every encounter that had brought her to this moment, and she turned slowly, eyes sweeping over the boardroom below where her decisions had begun to take effect, the subtle curve of her lips reflecting satisfaction and measured triumph, a silent acknowledgement of the transformation from underestimated to undeniable. While Ryan remained in the corridor below, frozen by the realization that the woman he had once mocked now moved through the world with precision, purpose, and an unassailable presence. And as Claire took a deep breath, feeling the city wind brush against her, she understood fully that her ascent was quiet yet absolute. Her authority, recognized not through confrontation but through the meticulous, deliberate steps she had taken, leaving a lingering tension in the air, the sense of anticipation for her next move palpable, and the skyline before her framed her silhouette perfectly. A woman whose journey from dismissal to dominance was complete, yet only the beginning of the story yet to unfold. Claire stepped away from the rooftop terrace, descending the glass-paneled staircase that spiraled gracefully toward the main floor, her movements deliberate, heels clicking softly against the polished stone, the sunlight shifting with the motion of the building, casting delicate reflections that danced along the walls and floors, a visual echo of her transformation from dismissed to undeniable. And as she entered the main atrium, the low hum of office life returned, keyboards tapping, soft conversations punctuating the air, all blending into a steady rhythm that seemed to pulse with her own poised energy, colleagues turning subtly in her direction, nodding with recognition, some exchanging quiet glances that spoke of respect and admiration for the woman who had quietly asserted her influence. While Ryan Mitchell remained at the edge of the atrium, a frozen figure, his posture taut, every movement betraying the disbelief that Claire had cultivated such authority without a single show of force, and she allowed herself a brief pause, hand lightly brushing against the smooth marble railing as she surveyed the space, the details of the environment now a stage for the silent power she wielded, the strategic decisions she had made manifesting in the attentive posture of her peers, the organized flow of operations, and the subtle acknowledgement of her presence in every corner of the room. Her mind reflecting on the journey from uncertainty to command, the quiet mornings spent poring over contracts and projections, the careful nurturing of relationships that had once seemed out of reach, each calculated step now culminating in a visible, undeniable shift in perception. And as she moved toward the executive offices, her posture unchanging, her gaze steady, she felt the weight of accomplishment in every controlled motion, the measured rise and fall of her chest, the calm certainty of her stride, while Ryan's eyes followed, unable to mask the realization that the woman before him was no longer the one he had known. And as she entered the office space, sunlight streaming through the expansive windows highlighted the precise details of her attire, her hair, her expression, all meticulously composed. And she took her place at the head of the conference table, gestures minimal but commanding, her colleagues instinctively aligning with her flow, the atmosphere charged with the subtle acknowledgement of competence, her voice calm and deliberate as she outlined the day's agenda, every word selected to convey authority and inspire confidence. The digital screens and charts providing context, but it was Claire's presence that defined the direction, Ryan lingering silently near the back, absorbing every shift in posture, every measured glance, the realization of her strategic brilliance settling over him like a quiet storm. And as she concluded the briefing, hands resting lightly on the table, her eyes sweeping across the room, the sunlight catching the edges of the modern furniture, reflecting in her composed features, a faint, self-contained smile touching her lips, a silent assertion of triumph earned through diligence, intellect, and quiet resilience, leaving a palpable sense of anticipation in the room, the subtle promise of further calculated moves to come. And in that suspended moment, every detail of the space, every reflection, every whispered acknowledgement became part of her narrative. The story of Claire Thompson, ordinary no longer, a figure of deliberate, measured authority whose presence reshaped the perceptions of all who watched. Claire exited the executive office and walked along the wide, sunlit corridor, the polished marble floor reflecting the soft morning light that streamed through the enormous windows, her steps deliberate and measured, each heel clicking a calm cadence that seemed to resonate through the quiet hum of the building. And as she passed the clusters of employees gathered near the workstations, subtle glances followed her, some impressed, some uncertain, all sensing the shift in presence, the aura of authority she now carried, and her thoughts traced the path of transformation that had brought her here. The months of strategic planning, careful cultivation of key relationships, countless late nights reviewing projections and negotiating quietly behind closed doors, the solitary work that had forged her resilience and sharpened her insight. While Ryan Mitchell lingered near the elevator bank, unable to mask the tension in his shoulders, every instinct alert as he observed her controlled movements, the meticulous way she held herself, her gaze scanning the environment with quiet precision. And as she approached the large conference room where the acquisition documents would be finalized, she felt a familiar thrill of anticipation, a steady pulse that matched the subtle rhythm of the building around her, the soft hum of ventilation, the distant murmur of phone calls, and the occasional shuffle of papers combining to form a backdrop that highlighted her command of the space, her reflection in the glass panels momentarily merging with the city skyline. A visual echo of the journey from underestimated to undeniably influential, and she stepped inside the room, the light catching the edges of the sleek table, the carefully organized folders, the digital screens illuminating figures and charts. All now part of the stage she orchestrated with calm authority, colleagues instinctively turning their attention, following her lead without a word, each gesture and glance reinforcing the recognition of her competence. While Ryan's eyes traced her movements, registering the subtle assertion of control she exercised over both space and situation, his earlier confidence giving way to the realization that the quiet, methodical woman he once overlooked had mastered every element of this environment. And Claire approached the table, fingertips lightly grazing the smooth surface, a deliberate pause allowing the weight of her presence to settle over the room, then began to speak with measured clarity, voice steady and precise, outlining the next steps with quiet authority, each word shaping the flow of action, decisions flowing seamlessly, the team responding with attentiveness, the energy in the room shifting subtly to reflect her leadership. And as she concluded, her eyes met Ryan's for a brief, unwavering moment, a silent acknowledgement of her assent and control, the city beyond the windows glowing softly in the morning light, casting reflections across the floor that seemed to echo her calm, calculated triumph, leaving a charged sense of anticipation in the air, the understanding that her careful, deliberate rise had not only altered perception but redefined the balance of influence within this space, every detail, from posture to presence, signaling the mastery she had claimed and the story of her quiet, unstoppable authority continuing to unfold. Claire moved through the open office floor, the soft echo of her heels mingling with the faint murmur of activity around her, sunlight streaming through the large windows casting long, angular shadows across the polished wood and glass surfaces, and she felt the subtle shift in the energy of the space, colleagues straightening slightly, their attention drawn by the quiet authority she exuded, every gesture precise, every movement controlled, a dance of calm dominance in contrast to the nervous anticipation rippling through the room. While Ryan Mitchell lingered near the far wall, his gaze following her with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant acknowledgement, recognizing that the woman he had once underestimated now commanded the attention and respect of everyone in the room, without raising her voice. Her mind replaying the months of careful planning, strategic meetings, late nights, reviewing financial statements, cultivating alliances, and methodically building the foundation for this moment. Each decision deliberate, every step calculated, the solitary work now bearing visible fruit. And as she reached the central conference table, she placed her hands lightly on the smooth surface, fingers splayed in a gesture that anchored her presence, eyes scanning the assembled team, noting the subtle nods, the exchanged glances, the unspoken recognition of her competence and preparation. Her voice, calm yet confident, carried through the room as she outlined the next steps in the acquisition process, each word chosen to convey authority and clarity, drawing everyone into a rhythm of engagement and focus, the digital screens behind her displaying charts, graphs, and projections that reinforced her points but were secondary to the power inherent in her composed presence. While Ryan's posture stiffened, the realization settling over him that the measured, deliberate woman before him had transformed into someone whose influence was inescapable, who had quietly and meticulously seized control. And as she paused for a moment to allow the team to absorb the plan, the sunlight catching the subtle shimmer of her watch and jewelry, she let her eyes drift toward the large windows framing the Manhattan skyline, the city stretching endlessly beyond, a reflection of the scope of opportunities she had quietly claimed, the breeze brushing softly against her hair, carrying the faint scent of the city, grounding her in the present, a reminder of both where she had started and how far she had come. And as she returned her attention to the room, offering a calm, deliberate nod, she sensed the unspoken tension in Ryan's shoulders, the silent acknowledgement of her accomplishment. And though she spoke not of the past slights or the dismissals endured, every motion, every glance, every measured breath communicated the narrative of resilience, strategy, and quiet power, leaving a charged atmosphere in which the audience could sense the impending decisions, the weight of authority she now held, and the anticipation for what she would do next, the unspoken promise that her presence would continue to reshape expectations, alter assumptions, and quietly, irrevocably define the terms of influence in a space where she had once been overlooked. Claire paused at the threshold of the grand conference room, the sunlight spilling across the polished wood floors, casting a warm glow that highlighted the crisp lines of her tailored blazer and the soft shimmer of her emerald green silk dress. And as she stepped inside, the quiet murmur of the team fell away, replaced by the subtle hum of anticipation that seemed to radiate from every corner of the room, colleagues exchanging glances, sensing the deliberate authority she carried. Each step she took measured, precise, a rhythm that underscored the control she now exercised over the space. While Ryan Mitchell lingered at the back, posture rigid, jaw tightening as he observed the calm confidence in every detail of her presence, the poised tilt of her chin, the deliberate cadence of her movements, the composed expression that suggested unshakable resolve. And Claire moved to the head of the table, hands lightly resting on the polished surface, fingertips tracing the edge as her gaze swept across the assembled team, absorbing their attention, acknowledging subtle nods, the careful exchange of information, each colleague attuned to the flow she orchestrated, her mind recalling the countless hours spent planning, negotiating, and quietly building influence. Each decision a carefully laid step toward this moment of command, the months of disciplined effort reflected in the attentive posture of those around her. And she spoke, voice calm, deliberate, carrying both clarity and quiet authority, articulating the next strategic moves, every word measured, every phrase reinforcing the precision and foresight that had become her hallmark, the digital displays behind her projecting data and charts that supported her points. Yet it was her presence, her composure, that directed the energy in the room, the subtle power of her narrative shaping the focus and engagement of all present. And as she paused, eyes meeting Ryan's for a brief, steady moment, the unspoken realization of her transformation settling over him, the disbelief giving way to acknowledgement, a quiet, internal reckoning with the fact that the woman he had once dismissed had grown into someone whose influence was undeniable, whose careful, deliberate approach had shifted the balance of authority without confrontation. And as she continued to outline her strategy, the sunlight shifting across the room, highlighting details of the environment, furniture, and reflective surfaces, Claire's mind remained centered, attuned to the room, the team, the moment, each breath measured, each motion precise, a silent declaration of control, her presence a testament to resilience, strategy, and the subtle mastery of space and perception, leaving the team and Ryan both captivated and unsettled by the quiet, undeniable power she now embodied, the sense of anticipation lingering in the air, every detail underscoring that this was only the beginning of the narrative she was poised to shape and command. Claire stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows in the executive suite, the New York skyline stretching endlessly behind her, sunlight glinting off the glass and steel of surrounding buildings, and she allowed herself a brief moment to breathe in the crisp morning air that filtered through the open balcony door, the scent of city streets mingling with the faint aroma of polished wood and coffee from the adjoining lounge, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble as she moved toward the central seating area where colleagues awaited her guidance, every step deliberate, measured, conveying authority without a word, while Ryan Mitchell lingered near the doorway, posture stiff, gaze fixed, the disbelief in his expression slowly yielding to reluctant acknowledgement, and Claire's mind traced the journey that had brought her here, the meticulous planning, the countless late nights reviewing contracts and financial projections, the subtle cultivation of key alliances, each small victory building upon the last until her presence commanded not just attention but respect, and as she reached the head of the table, she rested her fingertips lightly on the polished surface, allowing the room to absorb the quiet power she radiated, eyes sweeping across the team, noting the attentive nods and exchanges of acknowledgement that reflected her influence. Her voice calm and precise as she outlined the next steps in the acquisition process, each word measured, each sentence reinforcing her authority, guiding the decisions and focus of the room with subtle, deliberate command, while Ryan shifted uneasily, absorbing the reality that the woman he had dismissed as ordinary now dictated the flow of strategy and action, her composure unwavering, every gesture, glance, and controlled motion emphasizing the calculated power she had cultivated, and as the discussion progressed, Claire allowed herself a brief glance out the window, taking in the city sprawling beneath her, each reflection in the glass a reminder of the magnitude of what she had achieved, the careful construction of influence, resilience, and strategic mastery that had transformed her into a figure whose presence could not be ignored. And as she returned her attention to the room, hands resting lightly on the table, her posture exuding confidence, the energy of the team aligned with her focus, Ryan's expression shifted, the subtle tension in his shoulders giving way to recognition, every detail in the room attesting to her ascent from overlooked and underestimated to deliberate and undeniable authority. And when the briefing concluded, Claire allowed herself a brief, satisfied smile, the sunlight catching the shimmer of her watch and the delicate folds of her silk dress, a quiet declaration of triumph that needed no applause. Every action and glance a testament to the meticulous journey she had undertaken, the silent power she had claimed, and the unspoken promise that the decisions she set in motion today would echo throughout the company and beyond, leaving a palpable sense of anticipation for the next phase of her rise. The room hushed in acknowledgement of her presence, and the city outside continuing its rhythm unaware that within this suite, a woman had quietly, irrevocably reshaped the balance of influence, leaving Ryan to contemplate the magnitude of what he had underestimated, the subtle yet undeniable shift in authority marking the beginning of an entirely new chapter. Claire stepped out onto the rooftop terrace once again, the city skyline stretching in every direction, sunlight glinting off the glass towers and casting long, shifting reflections across the polished stone under her heels, and she inhaled deeply, the crisp morning air carrying the faint aroma of coffee and the subtle scent of nearby flowers from the terrace planters, each breath grounding her in the moment. The culmination of months of meticulous planning and quiet determination, while Ryan Mitchell lingered at the base of the stairs, eyes following her ascent, a mix of disbelief and reluctant acknowledgement etched across his face, every instinct telling him that the woman he had once dismissed as ordinary now radiated undeniable authority. And as Claire reached the center of the terrace, her gaze swept across the city, the wind teasing loose strands of her hair, the soft folds of her emerald green silk dress rippling slightly, reflecting a quiet, controlled elegance, and she allowed herself a brief, self-contained smile, a subtle acknowledgement of the transformation she had achieved through resilience, intellect, and deliberate action. The months of strategic negotiations, careful alliance building, and late-night reviews of spreadsheets and projections all culminating in this visible assertion of influence. And as she turned to face the gathering of senior executives waiting below for the next phase of her directive, the sunlight highlighted the calm authority in her expression, every detail of her posture, every controlled movement reinforcing the presence she had earned. Ryan remained silent, the realization settling over him fully that her power was no longer latent, that she had quietly assumed control in a way that required no confrontation, no declaration, her mastery evident in every gesture and glance. And as Claire began to speak, voice calm, measured, and precise, outlining her strategic vision for the upcoming acquisition, The attention of the room followed every word, colleagues leaning in, nodding, exchanging brief glances that conveyed recognition and respect, the subtle hum of computers and distant city sounds fading into a harmonious background that accentuated her leadership, while her eyes briefly flicked to Ryan, noting the tension in his shoulders. The subtle shift from disbelief to acknowledgement, and without needing to speak, she conveyed the story of her journey, of every slight endured, every challenge overcome, every careful decision that had built the foundation for this moment, the quiet triumph of intellect, patience, and unshakable focus. And as she concluded, letting the words hang in the air with the weight of authority, she allowed herself a moment to look out over the skyline once more, the city sprawling endlessly beneath her, reflecting the magnitude of her achievement, her influence woven seamlessly into the fabric of the organization, leaving a palpable sense of anticipation, the room silent in recognition, and the unspoken understanding that this was not a fleeting victory, but the establishment of a lasting presence, a statement of quiet power and deliberate mastery, leaving Ryan and everyone present with the undeniable impression that Claire Thompson had transformed every perception of her from underestimated to unassailable, the faintest smile on her lips a quiet testament to her triumph and the promise of more to come. Claire lingered for a moment on the rooftop terrace, the late afternoon sun casting long, warm shadows across the stone floor. The city below a mosaic of light and glass, each reflection catching the subtle shimmer of her emerald green silk dress, and she allowed herself a slow, measured breath, feeling the culmination of every careful step she had taken resonate in the quiet power that now defined her presence, the hum of the building and the distant murmur of traffic forming a soft backdrop to the scene, while Ryan Mitchell remained in the corridor below, a figure tense with the recognition of how completely the woman he had underestimated had transformed, and Claire's gaze swept across the skyline, absorbing the expanse of the city as if drawing strength from its vastness, each building a silent witness to the patience, strategy, and meticulous planning that had led to this moment, the subtle gleam of her watch catching the sunlight as she adjusted her posture with deliberate precision, a small, confident smile playing across her lips as she reflected on the months of disciplined effort, late nights, studying projections, negotiating quietly, building relationships, and asserting herself in spaces where she had once been overlooked. And as she stepped toward the glass railing, her reflection merged with the cityscape, a visual echo of the journey from underestimated to undeniably influential, the wind carrying a faint cool edge that brushed against her hair, the subtle movement of the fabric around her creating a rhythm that matched the measured cadence of her steps, and she felt a quiet satisfaction, a serene sense of triumph that required no words, no applause, only the acknowledgement embedded in the attentive presence of those who had watched her journey unfold, while Ryan, unable to approach, absorbed the scene with a growing awareness of the authority she now embodied, the confidence in every controlled gesture, every poised movement, every glance that silently conveyed command. And Claire allowed herself a moment to let her eyes rest on the horizon, feeling the weight of her ascent, the unshakable foundation she had built from patience, intellect, and determination, the sunlight catching the edges of the skyscrapers and glinting off her polished shoes as if to highlight her silent victory. And as she turned back toward the interior of the terrace, she noted the subtle nods of recognition from colleagues stepping onto the space, their expressions reflecting respect, admiration, and the quiet understanding that the balance of influence had shifted irrevocably, Ryan's shoulders slumping slightly, as he processed the reality before him. The woman he had dismissed had become a figure of deliberate, understated power, and Claire walked with measured grace toward the exit, every step echoing the journey of transformation, the city sprawling beneath her a canvas of opportunity, each light and reflection mirroring her own accomplishments, leaving a lingering impression that her presence, her quiet authority, and her meticulously earned influence would continue to shape not only the immediate space but the narrative of her ascent, the silent promise of future victories carried in every poised movement, every glance, every breath she took. The story of Claire Thompson's rise from overlooked to undeniably powerful concluding in a quiet, resonant triumph that spoke more loudly than any confrontation, leaving Ryan and all who watched with a deep awareness that her influence was now absolute, deliberate, and unstoppable.